Classical Arabic relies heavily on balagha, a highly structured system of rhetoric. In the Quran, this rhetorical framework uses specific, culturally embedded imagery to communicate complex theological concepts. Translating these verses literally into English often strips them of their emotional and cognitive weight. A direct word-for-word rendering can reduce profound metaphors into confusing literal statements that miss the author's original intent. A severe cognitive disconnect occurs when non-native English speakers attempt to read English translations of 7th-century Arabic metaphors. These highly structured native thought patterns violently collide with rigid foreign syntactic rules, resulting in completely scattered comprehension. Overcoming this disconnect requires two specific steps. First, the translator must preserve the exact rhetorical architecture of the original text. Second, educators must establish a pedagogical framework, allowing students to decode that architecture. Translation involves transplanting a complete cognitive model from one culture to another, rather than swapping out words for their linguistic equivalents. Abdullah Yusuf Ali's seminal 1934 English translation serves as the benchmark for successfully preserving the Quran's diverse figurative language. Ali's translation maintains the complex stylistic taxonomy of the original Arabic. He deploys distinct rhetorical strategies matched to the specific thematic goals of different surahs. The challenge for educators is finding a way to measure whether this translated figurative language is successfully preserved on the page and actively internalized by a foreign audience. By mapping Ali's translation through X.J. Kennedy's stylistic framework and analyzing Dr. Lubna Al-Manar's illustrating and designing pedagogical intervention, we can trace exactly how abstract rhetoric bypasses language barriers. The success of a translated metaphor is determined by whether a foreign learner can accurately reconstruct its underlying sensory imagery. X.J. Kennedy's 1991 taxonomy of figurative language provides the framework used to categorize the rhetorical devices operating inside Ali's English translation. Applying this framework, linguists identified 81 instances of figurative language across two chapters, Surah As-Saffat and Surah Ar-Rahman. The distribution is targeted based on thematic intent. In As-Saffat, we see a high frequency of specific tools, 14 instances of ellipsis, and 5 metaphors. As-Saffat is a Makkiyah surah focused on eschatological extremes, specifically the divide between heaven and hell. The frequency of ellipsis, omitting expected words, forces the reader to make rapid leaps between these states. Surah Ar-Rahman reveals a different rhetorical strategy. Here, a single device dominates the text, 31 recorded instances of rhetoric. This rhetoric takes the form of the repeated phrase, "Then which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?" This operates as a structural mechanism, emphasizing divine mercy, rather than an inquiry expecting an answer. Ar-Rahman also introduces pleonasm, deliberate redundancy for emphasis. Phrases like two and two enforce the surah's central theme of divine pairings and balance across creation. Ali's English text successfully captures this distinct structural divergence, preserving the specific mechanical intent of each surah. Through Kennedy's taxonomy, Ali's text displays a verifiable structure that supports the visualization of consequences required to influence human behavior. A precise architectural blueprint of translated text serves no purpose if the reader lacks the tools to process it. In a traditional classroom setting, pre-intermediate ESL students face severe friction when attempting to process high-level literary devices. Consider verse 64 of As-Saffat, which describes the Tree of Zaqqum springing directly from the bottom of hellfire. Verse 65 then uses a simile, stating the shoots of the tree's fruit stalks are like the heads of devils. The English word like signals the comparison, but decoding the cultural reference requires deep conceptual processing. In Dr. Lubna Al-Manar's study, students were asked to verbally explain or write sentences analyzing these specific symbols. The majority of the students struggled, losing points to basic word order and grammar errors. Traditional syntax analysis acts as a cognitive bottleneck. The student's limited English vocabulary traps the imagery, preventing the learner from demonstrating full comprehension. To bypass this syntax bottleneck, Dr. Al-Manar introduced a pedagogical intervention known as the illustrating and designing technique. Under this methodology, students listen to Ali's English translation of the figurative verses, completely foregoing written analysis in favor of sketching. This forces the brain to convert abstract literary devices like metaphor and personification directly into specific sensory tags. The students process the harsh contrast between the bitter Zaqqum tree and the gardens of heaven through visual representation, removing the requirement for complex English vocabulary. The results of the study reflect the success of this method. The majority of participating students successfully generated 3 clear, accurate representations of the imagery. Out of a maximum 15 points, the mode score for the class was 12, indicating a high level of comprehension across the participant group. The instructor noted that students initially feared their drawings wouldn't be understood and repeatedly asked to use explanatory words. Enforcing the restriction forced pure visual translation. These assessment scores indicate that the students' internal visualization of the text remained intact, even when their ability to articulate it through English grammar failed. Synthesizing these 2 studies shows how structural rhetoric can find a foothold in human cognition. Dipta identifies the specific devices used, and Al-Manor illustrates how students anchor those devices visually. We can examine Surah Ar-Rahman, verse 19, through this synthesized lens. The verse relies on the personification of the 2 bodies of flowing water meeting together, maintaining a strict boundary. Recognizing this phrase as personification under Kennedy's framework is the academic input. Visualizing the physical boundary of those waters under Al-Manor's framework is the cognitive output. Applying this to As-Saffat, the ellipsis device demands that the reader mentally fill in the blanks regarding the nature of heaven's rewards. The reader grounds the abstract concept of celestial gardens into a tangible geographic reality. The success of Yusuf Ali's translation lies in providing enough structural integrity for the reader's imagination to construct these exact physical realities. Stylistic fidelity in translation is only half the equation. Active sensory decoding by the audience completes the cycle of communication. The figurative concept originates in a 7th century cultural context, is preserved through strict structural taxonomy in a 20th century translation, and is finally decoded by 21st century learners. Text-heavy, syntactic approaches to teaching translated literature often obscure the qualities the original author intended to convey. When educators align stylistic analysis with sensory pedagogy, they allow the original intent of classical rhetoric to reach the audience directly. Slight pause for effect. The power of figurative language lies in its ability to transcend the lexicon, transferring profound, abstract truths directly into human experience.